Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and welcome back to another video. A video that admittedly I've tried to make quite a few times now, but honestly have really struggled to put together, because this is one that I want to express my thoughts and feelings without getting too heated. And honestly, I just don't think that's quite possible for me to do. So keep in mind that going forward, I'm going to be pretty real and transparent about how I feel, because I'm in both a mixed and irritated position to talk about the state of Mortal Kombat 1 as an overall final product. So for those unaware or who may be living under a rock, NetherRealm have more or less concluded their coverage and developmental cycle of Mortal Kombat 1, marking it as the shortest NetherRealm game to date, which is ultimately pretty disappointing because 1, how long we waited for this game to be released, and 2, what we were told about its future throughout the game's promotion. That is something I will be touching on a bit later on. And whilst NetherRealm has not outright come out with a statement addressing the end of the support, throughout the studio's history, the Ultimate and Definitive Edition of games have always typically marked an end to each installment, from Mortal Kombat 9's Complete Edition all the way to Mortal Kombat 1's Definitive Edition. Thus, whilst we may get patches here and there moving forward, I do not expect to hear anything in terms of DLC. Now, to really talk about this whole situation, we do have to work our way from the very top all the way down to the bottom. What works, what doesn't work, and what just really pisses me off about the game. Because across my entire 10 year of covering games on this channel, never have I tackled something that's been so unbearably miserable to cover. From start to finish, this game has been a dreadful experience, effectively killing a lot of passion that I do have for content creation. And the problems range from a variety of different reasons, from promotion to marketing to gameplay to its contents and its community. So let's go to the very top and work our way through it. First, touching on the promotion of Mortal Kombat 1. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this at all. The way the last two MKs have been promoted have been awful. The switch from a 12-month structure of promotion to a 4-month structure has been jarring to say the least, making whatever material we see feel rushed, and it clearly doesn't give the team enough time and breathing room to let the games flourish. That's where combat casts used to thrive, because there was enough time in between trailers and its promotion that allowed for the community to feel more interactive. We don't get that anymore, and I find that to be incredibly depressing. Because of this lack of promotional structure, it's made it nigh impossible to get a proper heads up for when a new trailer does drop, as we're only notified a day or two before it actually comes out. It's been horrible, and honestly I feel like the sudden switch to a 4-month structure has greatly crippled its content creator community, as we're not given a year to create interesting content surrounding the game, and with it coming out in such a short amount of time, I feel like it's really hindered newer content creators to the scene. With a smaller window of opportunity, it means that everyone's covering the same topics and gunning for the top promotional spot, and bombarding your feed in a way where content is simply lost in the fold. The tight time frame simply doesn't allow the next generation of content creators to grow. Now, credit is given where it's due. The trailers produced for the course of MK1's reveal was fucking stellar. That I can't take away from them. They did an incredible job selling us on the characters, the story, and the gameplay. Especially with the fact that they were extremely transparent with who you would be getting as DLC extremely early on. Because if you know anything about me, I'm really against blind waves of DLC. Because in my mind, if you buy a Game of the Year edition, you should know what you're goddamn paying for. So in that regard, they did do that right. Which now of course does bring us onto the game itself. Now for the sake of not repeating myself verbatim, I will only be briefly touching on the story mode here. If you want a full in-depth deep dive analysis of it, please do check out these thumbnails here, as they will link you to my full-on breakdowns of both the game's base story and Chaos Reigns. But just to gloss over my personal thoughts from then to now, as many of you do know, I like the story for MK1 for the most part, at least in its early stages. I think there's a number of things it does right in its first few chapters that really feels like it works to the benefit of MK, having it feel in line with the series as it embraces its tournament and martial arts roots. That is, until later on, where it fully decides to cast those ideas aside and effectively revert to the same gimmick and issues we have with MK11. But instead of having time travel being the main issue and gimmick, we have the multiverse stuff. And the thing is that this is just dumb. Time travel and multiverse theory really just isn't inherently MK. and it's anything but what the series needs to tackle. In my mind, the only time that such a thing was excusable was back in MK9, because whilst it made like no sense in universe, it served as a symbolic passing of the torch from the midway era of MK to that of the NetherRealm Studios era. Whilst I think the idea of the series ascending to that of the cosmic plane could work, as Geras is a perfect example of how that can work well, the multiverse stuff pushes hard and far beyond that threshold, having it so the story mode kind of loses the essence about what allows MK to feel like MK. And this now takes us onto characterization, and this is a fucking weird bag for me, because the new rendition of characters fundamentally work for some, but completely falter for others. Not all changes here are bad. In fact, there are some that are honestly fantastic, but there are indeed some instances here where changes have been applied for the sake of change, to tell a new story with an older character and somewhat reinvent them. And whilst I don't think that's entirely a terrible idea, when you inherently have a character that's been this established for this long and is this popular, alterations like this causes nothing but friction and problems. So the way I like to put it here is that for every Baraka, you are gonna get one Kuai Liang Sub-Zero. But here's the thing with MK1, and I really want to touch and focus on this, as I do feel there's a distinct difference with how a game tells its story and how it handles its lore. MK1 as a story is told really well in the early parts of its narrative, because it's given the benefit of re-establishing its world and characters. By not intertwining itself back to that of the old lore and mythos, it allows it to divert and gain its own sense of identity. But the very second the multiverse stuff is implemented, is where all of that stuff is convoluted. So everything that this new reboot tried to re-establishes is immediately out the window, because the reintegrating lore with the current canon really collides with the older source material. It effectively loses the benefit of becoming its own thing. So of course now, it brings up the question of, where do we go here narratively? And well, honestly, I don't know. People are calling for another reboot, and honestly, I think it's way too extreme and frankly lacks purpose. Plus, if anything, another reboot like this could essentially put us in the same exact position we are now, being susceptible to the exact same mistakes. I know others have suggested a Crisis on Infinite Earths event, something that can meld timelines together, mending characterization issues and remedying some alterations people have, but that idea also delves into more of the multiverse stuff that everyone does not like. In my mind, there's only like two avenues they can go down to make this all work. And the first is to stick to the current continuity and slowly ease our characters back to who they were prior to the reboot, tinkering a lot of those changes and allowing us to finally have that Onaga storyline. And no, I won't accept a 30-minute opening that concludes it like Shinnok in MKX or Dark Raiden in MK11. Give me that goddamn Dragon King. And the other option, too, and honestly, one I'm surprised no one has brought up, we simply follow the timeline and continuity set forth with the Liu Kang and Katana ending. Because honestly, in my mind, that's like a fairy tale ending, and the perfect branching point to take what works with MK1's narrative and what people liked about characters from the 9 continuity onwards. You also narratively get to run the excuse of not having Liu need to change everyone, because it's not just him envisioning this new entire world. He has Katana by his side to temper his alterations. So the Mortal Kombat 1 timeline can still exist, as it still does happen, but it's simply just a continuity that we don't follow from this point onwards. Kind of like MK vs DC in that regard. Because of it no longer being tied to the canon, you could effectively have it be conquered by Onaga, who at a later date can become a threat that's on par with the one being, and sets up as the next big bad. Now, if we don't wish to follow that avenue, because let's face it, at some point we're gonna have to hit the ceiling of reusing and retelling older ideas in this universe, I do think maybe Mortal Kombat could step into the more cosmic side of the narrative, with the Titans and their wards effectively being the next best go-to option here. And honestly, I do really hope they tackle this idea at some point, using their wards as a sign of their arrival. These individuals could effectively serve as mouthpieces to tell us what exactly are the Titans. Because honestly, at this point, with it being established, it drives my mind crazy how untapped it is. Yeah, it does kind of break the mythos a bit with the one being, but it can easily be remedied. You could simply say that the Titans now were the first age of Elder Gods who defeated the One Being, and upon his fall they would ascend to a higher plane and leave their kin to safeguard his remains, allowing them to travel the planes of reality in hopes of performing the same gift of life he did, only to fall to the madness of the void in the abyss. And there, wham, instantly fixed your Titan situation. I know some of you really want a conquest mode, but I'm just gonna have to be super real with you, man. We're never getting something like that again. Lord knows that I'm hoping I'm dearly wrong about this, but I think the sooner we can accept that a conquest mode is simply never being implemented or returning, the easier that bitter pill will be to swallow, because they haven't made one in nearly 20 years, and I really don't see them changing that formula anytime soon. So, story aside, this now takes us onto the gameplay side of things. Starting with the roster, and honestly, on my end, I think this is a great blend of different characters from different eras of MK. However, it's far from perfect in that regard, and the parts that I do take issue with on the roster is just the amount of guest characters we do have here is just like, it's way too much. Whilst I think the quality of the guests have been absolutely amazing in terms of how they homage their influences, I simply think that the ratio of Mortal Kombat characters to guest characters in these expansions have gone completely out of whack. And keep in mind, for me personally, this has arguably been my favourite wave of guest characters in any MK. I really fucking enjoy each of these characters, so that really has to mean something if that's coming from a fan here. I don't think we needed all of these guest characters over the course of just 2 combat packs. Now, as for how the game plays, I can tell that opinions on this are gonna be like super divisive across the board, especially with cameos. But at its core, and I mean like its fundamental combo system, I think it's very good. I think it's very fun, it's very satisfying. MK1 does a lot for me mechanically, because the core systems implemented are inherently very MKX in nature. They share a lot of similarities. However, the cameo system is where I do take issue with the game. Whilst I have enjoyed the system for the most part, it's very evident that the balance of this system has been a nightmare, as it's not even just the core base characters that are the issue, but what the cameos enable them to do. So whilst I think its core is very strong, I simply think that the cameo system really throws it all out of whack, creating a lot of issues that inherently go against the core of the game's system. But again, credit is given where it's due. The game has dramatically gotten better since release, with many of its issues like player one advantage being adjusted. So I will say in the game's current state, I think it's pretty good. Is it perfect? No, but it's much better than how it was on release, which again makes it all that much more frustrating that support is ending, because it's taken us so long to get to a place where the game feels this good, only for it to end. It's just fucking disheartening, man. And it also doesn't help that over the past few years, Ed Boon has noticeably gone down on record saying that Mortal Kombat 1 will get a longer lifespan to that of prior titles. And you know what? I believe that, man. I know a lot of people are holding these words over Ed Boon's head, but I don't think that's fair. Because here's the thing, I believe that's what he wants. I believe that he believes in his product and wants to support it longer. But what I don't believe is that he's the person holding the leash here. That would be Warner Brothers. And in a world where financial profit takes priority over anything else, it's simply not Ed Boon's call to make those shots, especially with the recent price hike of games and consoles across the globe. So once again, like I was before, I'm gonna have to be crystal clear and very transparent with you here. We just gotta stop asking for longer term support in these games, man. Because at this point, I guarantee you it's never happening. So that said, what does NetherRealm do next? Do they bring back cameos? Do they do full tag variations? Well, honestly, I think they can go down one of 2 paths here. One is to take us all back to basics, keep it easy, simple, and to the point. But if MK is really starved and desperate for a gimmick, why don't we bring back style switching from the 3D games? They've never been implemented on a 2D plane, and let's face it, it's pretty uncommon for the L2 button to be utilized. I think this is a great alternative that makes it unique, and you could even fill in the weapon fighter side of the market that Soul Calibur has left behind. It's all right there. Now, a fighting game is only as good as the modes that come to accommodate it. Something to help feed that gameplay loop, and MK1 has really struggled in that department, my god. For a series that honestly thrived in its offline content, I'm both disheartened and really disappointed to say that MK1 really missed the mark here, in both its legacy modes and online modes. For a strictly offline player, this game is incredibly bare on release, having released with its standard story mode and arcade mode, with the new additions through the invasions and the shrine, modes that essentially function as a way to fill the gap left behind by the Crypt. But here's just the thing, right? You just kind of can't do that. The Crypt is such an important part of MK's DNA. It isn't just complimentary of what Mortal Kombat has to offer as a product, but what the series has to offer beyond its fighting game mechanics. Truth be told, it was always going to be hard to top 11's Crypt, but the answer was never to gut it into what we got here. So if there's one thing I do hope they take away from the implementation of Invasions, is that this is not a good replacement for the Crypt. Whilst I praise the storytelling elements of Invasions, it's simply not enough to save that mode. But if they are to take anything from Invasions, is that I honestly hope that they take the storytelling elements and implement it into a future Crypt mode, where each season the Crypt is refilled with different skins for the players to unlock, and piece together a bit of story that's scattered and fragmented across the Crypt. I don't know, I'm spitballing the idea, but I really feel like something like that works. Now, it's not all doom and gloom, because I will say that the Towers of Time has been a fantastic addition, allowing for a better alternative way to unlock content, as well as Dragon Crystals. It's by far an absolute step in the right direction, but what I find that is not acceptable is that this mode wasn't here on release, as both Injustice 2 and MK11 did have a multiverse and Towers of Time mode. Again, glad it's here, but it's shit like this that in my mind has never made it more clear that corners were cut to put this game out. Now, from an online perspective, there are fundamental modes that are 100% lacking in my mind. And I think it's baffling to me that they aren't here, because there are modes that existed in prior titles that are simply scrubbed away. Not being able to go to a character select in the middle of a ranked match is quite frankly insane in my mind, as counterplay has always been a thing in Mortal Kombat games. Why is it that I can change my cameo but not my character? That is like something so incredibly basic. And talking of basic here, what happened to rooms and lobbies? One of the best parts of these games was the social element of them. And I will say on my side of things, as a content creator, one of the reasons why lobbies are so important is because it served as an incredible way for me to interact with my community. A simple way to engage with viewers through lobbies instead of having to put someone's name in. It was the best way to stream this game, and now it's gone. Yeah, there's an invite system, but I honest to fuck cannot be bothered to type in Wiener Lord 5000 or Chode Your Mama to play them. It's really stupid. And along with this, other basic modes like online training mode are still gone. How is training mode available in game but not online training? And don't get me wrong, some of the new replay stuff they have is fucking amazing. I hope NetherRealm sticks with that. That is a great addition. But its release came at such a far point in the game's lifespan that I don't think people are willing to lab it outside of the competitive players. And don't even get me started on the Warrior Shrine, man. We waited for an entire year for a glorified leaderboard. If that was really all it ever was, then it never should have been in game in the first place. In fact, I'm willing to go out on a leg here, but something else must have been planned for this in early development before it was then scrapped and turned into what it is now. Now, onto our final piece here. I can't lie, since Injustice 2, it's kind of baffled me how we've regressed in terms of customization within the series. Stats and loot boxes aside, the multiverse unlock system felt very complimentary from what you expect from an offline mode in an NRS game. It felt very rewarding where every fight would matter. I do think they went a tad bit overboard in terms of the number of different customization options, but the character skins really did show that there was a lot of personality that could be applied to the quality of the game. And like from this point onwards, we've had less and less options from 11 to 1. Yeah, being able to change a mask is cool, but it doesn't do nearly enough to affect the overall design. And in fact, it really doesn't help that a majority of quote-unquote skins in the game are simply color palette swap attires of the same 3 costumes. Actual skins that should be accessible that we want though, through let's say something like DLC passes, are instead paywall locked behind the goddamn store. And keep in mind that those are the skins that do dramatically change the overall appearance. I find it incredibly gross how the one way to acquire them is through dragon crystals, a limited currency you can earn in game until you crumble and buy the currency yourself. And currently, as of making this video, a perfect example of this being insanely whack is how you can spend said crystals to get the movie skins, which are said to be part of the definitive edition. You are essentially paying for a glorified early access pass to skins. Like, that's crazy to me. And this whole situation has venomously poisoned the atmosphere of Mortal Kombat, hitting the community in a really fucking bad way. I can only speak on my behalf as a YouTube only creator, as I don't stream, but I'll be very transparent when I say that covering this game has been an absolute nightmare. This game is by far the least fun I've ever had covering a game, because having nuance and being critical of a game you like has become a lost fucking art form. You can't say you like a game without being a shill, and you can't say you hate a game without looking like a hater. Like, where's the fucking line at this point? Constructive criticism, in my mind, has been lost in the discourse of talking and covering this game. Because look, why do you think all of a sudden your big mainstay channels associated with MK no longer upload MK1 content on a frequent basis? Is it because they're no longer shills? Or is it because the discourse surrounding the game has stripped any sense of fun covering it? This is the only MK to date that I've known content creators to retire from. At this point, we're all caught in this goddamn vicious cycle, and this is a perfect example of a game that was promised to deliver so much that did far too little too late. It had all the ingredients and all the potential in the world to be NRS's strongest title, and it's anything but that, which is why I find it so unbelievably frustrating, considering all they had to do was take the best elements of their prior titles and put it into one neat package. In my mind, what sucks here the most is the unbridled potential this game had to offer, and now it's all simply just going to be tossed aside into the ether as NetherRealm is forced to roll out yet another title. As for what's next from the studio, I don't know. I know Max has been talking about MK vs DC, and I have been hearing some rumblings about an Injustice 3. We'll simply have to wait and see. Until then though, this has been it for my largely long-winded rant. I'm sorry this has taken so long to come out, but I really do have a lot of thoughts on this overall situation that I wanted to kind of tightly knit together into one coherent video. I don't like dogpiling on MK1, much the opposite, as it's effectively the cool fucking trend to do at this point, but I do feel like some actual critical nuance to this situation has been lost. And at this point, this shit's just not fun. Whilst other content creators haven't said it, I will. Anyway, here's hoping it gets better, because if it doesn't, well, I won't be here for the next game.